Hi guys, welcome back to the Astro Imaging channel. Tonight's session is on taking flats, and I'm going to show you how I made my do-it-yourself or do-it-myself flat panel. Um, as as always though, our image of the week. Oh man, and I screwed it up already. I'm sorry, bear with me for 1 second. I managed to always get distracted right before the shows. Um, and I have to screen share, don't I? This week's image of the week is Richard Flynn's Trifid Nebula, and that's a beautiful image right there. Maybe Richard will come on next week and share some info about his image. And this is an LRGB image, so he's usually shooting some good narrowband stuff, but this is a cool one. Hopefully he can come on. But I'll save that for next week. Jumping back, taking my camera back. Okay, so and you can see right behind me my flat box and my flat panel. And I'm going to go into a little bit of that. So bear with me one more time as I screen share, and then I'm going to jump right into my presentation. I don't think I'm forgetting anything. I don't know. I had a nice long weekend. Felt short and tiring. There we go. Okay, stop me if you cannot see my screen or my presentation shared full screen. I did have a question come in the comments that I'm going to hit probably towards the end. It's one of those things that I hope I can help with, but let me go through my presentation first, then I'll get into it. Flat frames and a do-it-yourself EL panel. So one of the things that when I'm chatting with someone, I find out he's an astrophotographer, and I want to see how serious he is about what he's doing. I ask him, "Oh, are you taking flats?" And why do I ask that? Well, I don't know. I feel like flats they are the most important calibration frame. If you're not taking flats, you're really missing out on a significant boost in quality of your images. In most cases, there are tubes that do have fairly fairly flat fields, and it's not going to make a huge difference unless you have dust motes or that type of thing. But for the most part, well, let me get to my. If I don't take flats for a specific night's data and I break down my setup for one reason or other, I'm really disappointed, and I end up not even using that data because they're just that important. It's really hard. There are ways to compensate it by making a synthetic flat, but it's really hard to really get the same performance you would with an actual flat that you've imaged with the sensor in the same orientation before you removed it. So the reason I ask that of people is because I really want to kind of drill home the importance of them. And I can tell right off the bat that if someone's taking flats, they've put in the time and effort to want to make their images better. So that's basically, well, the beginning of this presentation is basically my me saying, please take flats, do it for yourself, do it for your images. But at the same time, they are a bit difficult. It's not just like taking darks or biases, where all you have to do is, I don't know, put the cover on the telescope and snap, 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 or set up an imaging run. Flats take some determination, I guess you could say. So why take flats? You can remove dust motes. There's dust on your sensor window. There could be dust on your filters if you're a CCD guy, a mono CCD guy. In addition to that, and sometimes more importantly, flats will correct uneven illumination, which is basically a product of optical systems. The corners will be dimmer than the interior of the image. Something all of us probably know, but if you've never taken flats before, it's something that you will start to struggle with. My first few images, basically the corners are black and looks like a little window, a circular window around the object that I was photographing. I didn't know what I was doing wrong, but later I come to find out what I was doing wrong was I wasn't taking flats. In addition to dust motes and uneven illumination, you can compensate for some obstructions. The OAG prism, an off-axis guider prism that kind of infringes in the light path, will, in some instances, give you a little dark spot. I know when I switch from my longer focal lengths to my faster systems, if I don't move my off-axis guider prism, sometimes I'll see it in there. In addition to that, it can also correct for, and this is a bit like uneven illumination, choke point. So if your T adapter is actually your smallest, or if your T adapter or any part of your optical train is inhibiting some of the light path around the edges, it does produce that vignetting effect, and it causes that same darkening of the edges. So flats really are the best way to compensate for that. If you have a choke point, if you're using an off-axis guider and the prism's infringing in the light cone, then, well, the best way to compensate for that is get it out of there. OAG prisms can sometimes cause diffraction effects on stars, so there are better ways to take care of that, but for the actual illumination problems that they cause, flats will fix them. Here's an example of a dust mote. You can see it there because it's circled in my image. But this is on my blue filter, and it's so this is quickly. I believe this is a. Let me look at that. No, that's probably a raw sub. Yeah, so this is a raw sub, and you can see the dust mote right there. As I stack this, that's actually going to continue to integrate, and you're going to see a nice solid dust donut, as we call it, in there. This is also in the corner of my sub, so you can see the darkening toward the edges. But here you go. This is uneven illumination. In fact, I've got two things in this one to show you. Ignore that line going down the center of the image. I realized something I did wrong in my image. Well, my field drifted to the left one night. Don't know why. And for some reason, I have different noise profiles on the left side and the right side. But look at the uneven illumination. Look at the darkening of the corners there. You can see that vignetting effect. This is an uncalibrated but stacked image. I'm sorry, this is a calibrated but without flats stacked image. And up on the top of there, you see kind of a dark line going across. That is my off-axis guider prism infringing on the light cone. Worked pretty well in my SCT at F. I was running this at F10, but then I put it on my new RC, which I'm running at F5.7, and all of a sudden the light cone is steeper, and that off-axis guider prism should, to improve the image, be raised up a little bit, but I haven't gotten around to that yet. Here's a comparison. Same image, one with flats, one without flats, and you can see how clearly it cleans that up. I mean, this really demonstrates it well. I used the same number of subs. I did all the same stuff on this. The only difference is that the left side does not have flats. The right side does. And look how cleanly that the flats clean it up. Well, wow. Cleanly the flats clean it up. Well, either way. Even the up top, you can see the off-axis guider prism issue gone. So I don't know. Looking at that right there, that would convince me. Here's the problem. Okay, skip that. Let me go back here. How to apply flats. Let your PC do it. Flats are easy to apply in processing. There's no issues processing flats. All pre-processing programs can accept flat frames. It's basically, when it comes to pre-processing, just like darks and biases. applying flats in software is not hard. How to take flats? Well, before you move your equipment, and that's the difficult thing. Before you rotate your camera, before you I even say before I bump my equipment hard, because you don't want the dust to float around, you need to find an evenly illuminated light source, and that can be difficult. There are the biggest difficulty is finding that evenly illuminated light source at the right time. Okay, let me go through a specific example. You're shooting, you've got all of your photographs taken for the night, you're out at your dark site, and it's 4 a.m. 4 a.m. rolls around, you decide to wake up, you're probably sleeping in the back of your car or something, and you want to break down your equipment, but you need to take flats. Where's your evenly illuminated light source? You're in trouble, right? Well, what I'm going to show you in a little bit is going to help you out with this. In addition to finding that evenly illuminated light source, you have to determine the proper exposure. With a DSLR, you can use AV mode, and AV mode basically tells you when your histogram is just about at that midpoint. With a CCD, even though we have histograms, it's more accurate to use readings of the ADU. It gives us a numerical value that basically says, well, of your 60-some thousand points, you want to aim for 30,000, an average of 30,000 across the frame. That's with my camera. And then from there, you take 20 or so frames. Well, if you're a narrow band or a mono guy, a mono RGB guy, then you have to take 20 or so frames per filter. So the questions, if you haven't taken flats already, the questions are probably building up in your mind right now. Well, okay, that does sound a little bit difficult. So let's talk about this evenly illuminated light source. Well, you can use the clear sky, and this is the cheapest method. Is it evenly illuminated? Well, at sunset, you have to wait until kind of the perfect time. During the day, there's a gradient going across. And at 4 a.m., you've woken up out of your car. Well, it's dark out. Are you going to wait for the morning? Are you going to wait 2 more hours until the sun starts to rise and the sky is pretty well evenly illuminated? Well, you could do that. You could do the t-shirt method too, which gives you one layer of baffling. So if there is a slight gradient through the sky, that may help you a little bit. You basically take a white t-shirt, put it over your telescope, put a rubber band around it holding it so that it's flat, no wrinkles in it, and then shoot your flat frames. Well, wait a minute. You have to determine your exposure. And when you're talking about the sky, in the morning, the sun's rising, so the sky is changing in brightness levels, and when you start shooting your flats, the sky is going to be dimmer than when you're finished shooting your flats. Some programs will actively compensate for this, but that gets really difficult. If your program works for it well, then yes, it can be a good way of doing it. But at the same time, you do have to take that into account. So that's why I'm not a big fan of sky flats. When I first started out, I had a big problem with sky flats, so I decided to make myself a flat box. And those are my 2 flat boxes. The one on the left there is for my 8-inch telescope. The one on the right is for my wide field scope. And basically all the flat box is it's built of foam core, tracing paper, tap light. I used an X-Acto knife to cut out the shapes. I used a hot glue gun. Inside of that flat box are baffles. Basically, I cut circles. Well, I made my box. I made 3 baffles inside of it. I cut big circles out of the interior baffles. I put tracing paper in there, and the 3 baffles gives the tap light enough baffling, let me say, to get it evenly illuminated by the time I hit by the time it hits my telescope, or the window of the telescope. Big and if you want to use a really cheap method, but you don't want to go quite as cheap as using the sky, but you want a little bit more convenience out of it, this is still a good method. I would have gone into more detail about the flat box and how to build one, but when I discovered the next option, I really said, well, wow, this is really reasonably priced. This is the best method, and for the convenience, it's really worthwhile. But basically, yeah, foam core, tracing paper, tap light. You can buy them at CVS. You can buy them at Walmart. You can pretty much get them everywhere. I want to say Harbor Freight will give you a tap light just for setting foot in the store. In some cases, of course, they'll also give you the what is it? The I don't know. They bribe you to get you into their store. But what am I looking for? I forget all those offers they have. Oh yeah, tape measure, level, yeah, set foot into Harbor Freight, and they give you all sorts of free stuff.
Dude, voltmeter.
Voltmeter, yes, I have a few of those.
Yes.
Voltmeter, yeah.
You need a few of them to keep the wires, which are always breaking.
Exactly, yes. And I actually had a friend who saw me using the Harbor Freight voltmeter, and he gave me his really nice voltmeter. So I was hooked up. But yeah, voltmeter. Yeah. So flat box, it can work. Now this big guy here, when I'm traveling, I strap that big guy into the front seat of my car, so I have the whole back of my car packed up, and that just won't fit anywhere well. So I end up strapping it into the front seat of my car. That gives you an idea as to how big it actually is. Does it have to be quite that big? No, you could use more baffling and shrink it down a little bit, but they're still pretty annoyingly big. And yeah, even worse when my wife wants to sit in the front seat and I say, nope, get another ride. So moving on. This is what we're here about. Flat EL panels. Electroluminescent EL panel. I don't even know. I call it an EL panel. Definitely the most expensive option. Over there on the right top, you'll see the Gerd Newmans, and I have a Gerd Newman. When I got one for my 8-inch SCT, I want to say it was $220. I don't think that includes the inverter. Then I dropped it off my telescope once, and I had to buy a new one. So I've got like close to $500 into this EL panel, and it works really well. And I'll actually say this: the Gerd Newmans work great. They're a nice tight package. If you're not a do-it-yourself guy and you want to be using it the next day or in a couple days, order one of these. You won't be disappointed. On the bottom there, you'll see a flip flat. That, if you are remote or just plain old lazy, then that thing will basically act as your telescope cap, your lens cap. It'll flip itself up, it'll flip itself down, it'll turn itself on, and you can, I don't know, operate it from inside your house or from across the country. The remote guys, a lot of the remote guys are using these things just because they have to. If you don't want to rely on sky flats, the flip flat's a great way to go. But EL panels really are the most convenient, thus the expense. You can take it at any time of the day. More importantly, the exposure length is repeatable. You can determine the proper exposure using your R filter, your G filter, your D filter, and you know for the most part within about 1,000 ADU, you're going to be pretty much able to repeat that anytime you go out. You can have it stored in your software. You don't have to go through your flats calibration wizard, or you don't have to keep taking exposures of different lengths to determine your proper exposure. And this is more important for the CCD guys. The DSLR guys kind of have it easy. AV mode gets you pretty darn close to the right exposure. And when it doesn't, when there's some sort of glitch with AV mode on a DSLR, you can still use AV mode and say, okay, well, AV mode shows me that I need a half a second exposure, but I know that it's better if I go with 4/10 of a second exposure for this particular reason, for one reason or another. And yeah, repeatable exposure length, really valuable. But you only have to do it once. Small and flat. So these, my flat panel actually, well, my old flat panel actually fits right inside of my laptop bag with my laptop. I no longer have to boot my wife out of the car. I no longer have to strap that big flat box in. It's just a nice, tight package. Better than that, I'm not really concerned when it's windy out and the wind could blow my flat box. Remember, that flat box is hanging off the end of the telescope, so if it's windy, that flat box basically could go for a ride. I don't have to worry about that. I do occasionally have to weigh down these flat panels just enough so that I'm not concerned about that type of thing. The wires tend to be delicate on these things, so you don't want it to fall off your telescope. You want to make sure that your mount is turned off when you're taking these, because as I discovered, if you take your flats, your mount's turned on, hooked up to your computer, then sometimes when you're done taking your flats, your mount wants to park itself, and then whoop, your EL panel goes for a ride. Your $200 EL panel goes for a ride, and most likely breaks the wires. More importantly, you can run these things off AC or DC. So you have lots of options for powering them. They are very convenient. If you start using one of these things, you're not going to want to go back. So I said they were expensive, but basically, if you are willing to do it yourself, they're not so expensive. This is a list of the materials you're going to need. EL film, an inverter, and power cable. So this is where I bought mine, blowhut.com. And the reason I like this particular source is, I'm not going to tell you every reason, because all I'll say is I was slightly more confident that this source would have balanced color channels, which is not terribly important for CCD cameras, but it's a little bit more important for DSLR cameras. Not that I really use a DSLR much, but I wanted to know that if I did, it would work for me. But basically, the EL film, the inverter, the power cable, all together, for up to a 4-inch refractor, it's going to cost you $36. For up to a 12-inch reflector, it's going to cost you $93. The acrylic, you are sandwiching one of these things in acrylic. Basically, all the acrylic you're going to need, possibly even a lifetime supply, is going to run you $20. And you can use white opaque acrylic. They come in percent ranges of the percent of light that it's passing through. And typically you see them rated 40 to 60. I think they have 20s out there, but the place that I bought it from, which was Amazon, I saw 40 to 60. You can buy them in different thicknesses, and due to the fact that a lot of us are using wide field fast setups and slower, longer focal length setups, what I'm going to suggest doing is buy one piece of acrylic in that range and buy an additional one for additional dimming. You can buy a thinner one for that additional dimming, but basically you want to have more than one option. Remember, a faster setup is going to expose quicker, and May not be an issue with the DSLR, but with the CCD camera, you can only have, well, there's a lower limit on your exposure length. I think that SBIG reports my minimum exposure at, I don't know, a 10th or a 20th of a second, but I don't feel comfortable in that range. I like to get at least half a second, just because sometimes you can have some shutter effects. Even though the shutter is supposed to be an evenly illuminated shutter, when you go faster than that particular exposure range, sometimes it does show up. One other thing to consider is with a DSLR, and this is actually where DSLR might need additional dimming or baffling. These light panels do have a specific frequency that they operate at. So if you are shooting faster than that frequency, you might actually see lines in the flat, and that's a no-no. That will screw up your flats. I have seen people use dimmable EL panels, and that is actually pretty complex to do, and I cannot speak to how you do that. I've read a few articles. I actually read a nice long article about how you can dim a flat panel, and then at the very end, the guy said something like, oh, you know what, I realize this doesn't work. So a lot of reading for nothing. But you can dim them, but I'm not quite sure how it is. It's not just as simple as reducing the current going in. They all operate on AC. So reducing the DC current going in, while it may work sometimes, doesn't always work.
Adam, quick note on that.
Yes.
Theoretically, it should not work, but it actually, if you put a dimmer before your inverter, it actually works pretty well. Getting the light to actually be quite a bit dimmer.
Any particular type of dimmer?
I can post a link to it. It's just one that I bought on Amazon. It was like a $5 dimmer, but tried it on like 5 or 6 different panels on the ones that you're using specifically.
Okay. There you go. Actually, we'll get that posted at the end of the session, because I was reading a ton of stuff on it and I couldn't figure it out. Not that I tried, but I was more concerned about burning something out. I'm not an electrical guy, so this is about the extent of my electrical know-how. Even hooking my homemade cable up to my CCD camera, I sweated out right before I did it.
To do it pretty accurately, you probably need a pulse width modulated dimmer.
That's what I was going to ask, but I didn't know if the pulse width modulator would specifically. That's actually what this article went into. Oh, PWM will work, blah 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 blah, and then at the very end, oh, it doesn't work so simply. So,
it's not going to be a simple implementation, because it's dependent upon the inductance and everything of the panel itself, and so there's more to consider than just slapping a PWM dimmer on the back of it. But
yeah, if you want them to be completely repeatable, then you need to do some kind of digital control of it, either through USB or PWM. If you just need to dim it to make it a little bit dimmer so that your flats can be longer, and you don't have set times for every time you use them, then you can just use a dimmer.
But this, remember, is one of the reasons why you don't want very short exposures, because with the longer exposures, if there is something happening where it's varying somewhat, it varies fairly quickly. So if you take a longer exposure, that variance will average out.
Yep, exactly. And of course, dimming it allows you to take a longer exposure for those who haven't put that together. So that's the point of dimming it. That's why we're talking about dimming these things. If you haven't used a CCD, you probably are saying, why would they want to dim it? Or if you haven't had that issue of seeing the frequency of the panel in your DSLR. But yeah, that's that benefit of dimming it. And if you're not comfortable wiring up a PWM or anything like that, that additional piece of white opaque goes a long way. So this acrylic, vendors will actually cut this stuff for free. You buy it and they'll cut it. But it's pretty cheap, and a lot of them tend to sell them in just about any size. In addition to that, you can cut the acrylic yourself. It comes with film on both sides of it. So I think, well, depending on what kind of tools you have, it's not going to be that difficult to cut. And electrical or duct tape. I didn't put the price on this because you must have this already. I don't know. If you don't have duct tape in your house, then I don't want to talk to you. So basically, the EL panel inverter considerations, I suggest buying a pre-wired panel. Glow Hut, that I posted the link to, pre-wires their panel. There are a bunch of places out there that sell panels that aren't pre-wired, so you end up having to buy the metal tape and you wire them up, but it gets really delicate unless you're really good at, I don't even know what you have to be good at. It gets pretty delicate. You can see how they covered it up there with tape on the top right. Underneath that, there's 2 ribbon wires that those normal wires are attached to. It could be a little bit, well, if you don't do it well, it could be delicate. And delicate and dark are not the best combination. We have enough delicate equipment out there. You don't want one more piece that you're really going to be moving around a lot in the dark. Select a white panel. These things come in all different colors. You don't want the red, you don't want the blue, you don't want the green. You want the white. You do need to make sure that you match your inverter to the panel. The inverter's output is based on the square inches of the panel. So if you buy a 12 by 12 panel, your inverter is going to be different than your inverter for the A3, A4, A5 size. And decide how you want to power it. If you want to power it with DC, basically you get yourself either a cigarette lighter plug or you wire yourself up a power pole plug. If you want to run AC, all you need is one of those little wall warts, which is going to be matched to your inverter. If you want a battery pack, you can actually do a double A. What is it? Is it 8 double A's? I have one sitting over my shoulder there. 8 double A's gives you 12 volts. There's lots of different options. Just really depends on what you want to do for your particular setup. Acrylic considerations, white acrylic opacity options, 20 to 60 are the ranges that they come in. When you go on Amazon, you're going to see mostly 60s, and that did end up working for me. Of course, it's the percent light transmission. You have to take into account is brightness an issue. If you're using a slow setup, it might not be that much of an issue, but I said earlier, buy a second panel, buy maybe even a panel of different thicknesses so that you can compare. DSLR versus CCD, narrowband versus RGB, fast versus slow. If you're shooting mostly narrowband, you can probably get away with a thinner panel and get those faster exposures out of it. They're still going to be 5 seconds. They're still going to be 3 seconds. They're not going to be 3/10 of a second though. So you're going to be over that threshold. Buy an extra sheet, as I said. Use for extra baffling. That way you can get it to work across many F ratios. Buy a back so you can sandwich the EL panel. And you can use any color you want. And I'm going to show you mine in a few seconds so you can get an idea as to what I'm talking about here. Oh, look at that upside down. I guess this didn't save properly. But, well, that's a picture of mine. I'm going to show you the real deal in a few seconds. So, but that's my 12-inch EL panel. And after building this thing and it working so well, I'm going to make myself a smaller one. Oh, that's it? Could have swore I had something else in there, but I must not have saved in there. But let me steal my camera back because what I'm going to do is, okay, I'm going to turn around, and basically this is the EL panel, and this is what I was talking about before. This actually came with my RC scope. I can power the EL panel off this. Fortunately, the plug is the same thing that plugs into the fans of my RC, but I have it plugged into the outlet right here just for the sake of convenience. Turn it on, and there you can see. Lights up, fairly evenly illuminated. Going to turn it off. They do say do not unplug these while they are do not unplug the EL panel while they are plugged into the inverter with the inverter power on. I'm not sure why, but I heed that warning because I don't want to break anything. And basically, that's it. White acrylic on the front. I chose black shiny acrylic on the back. I don't know. It'd be nice to, I don't know. I guess you could put any sort of sticker on the back you want, but that's basically it. About,
Adam,
yes, go ahead.
could you comment on the quality of the attachments, the wiring, and all that other stuff?
So basically, let me just say that all EL panels are delicate, but I do not see any difference in the quality of this wiring as I did my expensive EL panel that I bought.
I did the same thing you did there, and I was a little, it was real iffy as to whether that stuff would last for very long, and in fact, it didn't last very long. It's, you know, but you're saying the expensive stuff doesn't look much tougher.
I've already broken one. Um, so I noticed the wow. I noticed the connector is the same. The wiring looks the same. I don't. I have really no reason to complain about this relative to my old flat panel. I don't know if the Alnitak. I'll assume the Alnitak is being more customizable solution.
Rugged?
Hey, Adam, I have a couple comments on this.
Go ahead.
I can actually show people too. I'll share my screen if that's all right on this. So the Allen Attack does not have a power cord. It has this USB. So you just plug that right into here, and that's the connection for that. So that's very solid. So not really anything to worry about with that. One other point that you brought up, and I just want to show just a couple of things kind of to piggyback on what you were talking about. You were talking about being afraid of the flat panel actually falling off your scope potentially at night. So one thing that we started doing, if you have access to a 3D printer, you can print a little bit of a flange for it so that it actually cups around your D shield and then it won't come off. And then
just a second, Josh, on that point, you can take a piece of foam, just a packing foam of the appropriate size, cut a hole in it the size of your front of your scope, attach that somehow to your EL panel, and you can slip it on the same thing if you don't have the printer. Sorry for the interruption.
Yep, and you can layer them and pretty easily make them different for different OTAs. The other biggest thing I was going to say is that I've had issues with those wires on the Gert Newman and the same ones on that EL panel that you were talking about. And if you're going to use them, I highly recommend putting some kind of strain relief on them, like hot glue or whatever you have, if you want to tie it to something on whatever box you make for it. But they are very delicate. They're delicate coming in and out of the inverter, and they're also delicate after the actual connectors too. So
I've lost one inverter already, for my Gerd Newman as well, the same way, right, and had to replace it. The connections right off that inverter are definitely very delicate.
Yeah, so either a big glob of hot glue right where it comes out and kind of put it up against the inverter, or actually somehow attach the cable to the inverter somewhere in between, because a lot of people travel with these and live with them, so you want to be gentle with them.
Adam, I was just going to ask you a question about that. So how do you use this right now? Do you point the telescope to zenith and just lay it on top right now?
Yep, that's what I do.
You don't have anything that holds it on there?
I don't have anything that holds it on there. Now I'm using a 10-inch RC, so basically it's a little bit more stable than if I was trying to rest it on my William Optics, which is how I broke my 8-inch Gerd Newman, was putting the William Optics, was putting the Gerd Newman on a 3-inch telescope, and then having my mount start slewing before I could run out there and top it.
Hey Adam, I've got a quick question if that's okay, but I just noticed there is a question in the YouTube comments and in the Q&A
Yes, and
Um,
I'm going to get to your questions. I'm sorry about that. I just wanted to wait till the end because it was more in regards to ADUs, and we can talk about that for a little while.
yeah, and I think they're all related too, because the YouTube comment is about flats and how the histogram should look.
Yes, yes.
But did you want
Adam,
to do those, and then I'll ask my question?
Okay. You know what, Dylan? Unless you ask your question, because Sammy's
Okay.
question is going to take me a little while because I'm going to have to ask him some questions, and that's the only reason I was saving this till the end.
No worries. So I've got this problem shooting with a color CCD that when I shoot my flats using sky flats, because I've got a hyperstar, so I don't really have the option to do, you know, a t-shirt method or a box or anything like that. I'm shooting at the sky. But when I go to calibrate my images, I end up with a kind of reverse vignetting where it's really light around the edges. Is there some way that I should be normalizing the master flat before I apply it, or is that more about that keeping it around the 30,000 ADU that you were talking about?
Okay, so this is an RGB camera, correct?
Yeah, one-shot color.
And Sammy, maybe I'll ask this question of you right now. Are you using an RGB camera, or are you using a mono? QHY9M, that's the mono, isn't that? Okay, so maybe it's a little bit different of a question. Sammy, just confirm for me that you're using an RGB camera. The problem with using, one of the potential problems with using an RGB camera, and really any flat method, is that let me say the spikes on the histogram for the R, the G, and the B channels may not quite line up. And in some cases, I did actually shoot this panel with my DSLR to see how balanced the color channels were. And I think it's sufficient for most RGB cameras, but the blue channel was spiked over to the right a lot more. So what you might end up, and what you want to do is you want to make sure that each of those channels are within the linear range of the camera. Overexposing it tends to put it out of the linear range. So what I would say is focus on reducing or bringing the histogram spikes to the left. So that would be reducing the exposure, dimming the panel. May not be an option with Hyperstar, but I think it kind of, I think, Dylan, that might be what you would have to do. Now the other thing, and I'm not sure how programs deal with this. I don't know what calibration program you use, but there's probably a way to split the channels and use 3 different exposure lengths of flats. Even though you're using an RGB camera, use different flats to expose the individual channels properly, and then possibly somehow in processing to maybe even if you were were to calibrate 3 times as many images as you need, but then split the channels out and only use the channels from the full set of calibrated images that you spit out. So that way you end up having a set of images that you know the red channel is properly flat calibrated in, then another image where you know the blue channel is properly calibrated, and then another image where you know that the green channel is properly calibrated, and then you split the channels and then recombine them. But I will say this, I haven't had that issue, so I don't specifically know how to deal with it. So that would be my best thought on it. I did shoot this panel with the DSLR just to see how the colors lined up, because that was one of the things I was concerned about. But it's also one of the things that I can't speak to so well, just because it's hard to fix a problem you've never experienced before. Now, Sean is commenting. I don't know if you guys out there can see it, but Sean is commenting that reverse vignetting, flats are too bright if it's reverse vignetting. He just went through this with his color camera, and he dropped the exposure to 1/10 of a second, and flats work fine. Sky flats might run into bias noise if too short. It's a good point.
One other comment on that is that another thing that can cause that or other issues with the flats is if you're not using bias frames or flat darks with them, to absolutely have to use bias frames both with your regular image and with your flats. Otherwise, you're going to struggle to get them to calibrate correctly.
And make sure, and I think Josh pointed this out to me a year ago, that you're not relying on PixInsight to pick your dark frames and scale your dark frames, because the exposure time on your flats is going to be substantially different, and PixInsight may not properly scale that that dark frame, and as a result, basically you don't get a calibration off the dark frame, and you're getting screwed up flats. But you don't see it because it all happens in the process console while you're off having your cup of coffee.
And what I'm actually going to read out Sammy's question just so we all.
Just Sam, before we do, while we're still on the topic of how to make a flat box, can I show how I made my flat box? 2-3 minutes.
Go right ahead, Alex.
I'm going to try to screen share here my entire screen. And am I okay? And then I'm going over to PowerPoint, and are we good?
I see you. Yep.
Okay. Here is my flat panel, and you can see there's the snout of my 12-inch RC is pointing to the wall of my observatory, where I've got a 24 by 24 inch roughly LED flat panel. This is the way it looks in actual action. Actually, this isn't the way it looks in actual action. You can hardly tell that it's on when it's taking flats. It's kind of boosted up right now so you can see a lot. And I want you to notice that it's got the light here. This light is not usually on. It's a light that I'm running in the observatory, this little edge of a fluorescent tube here. But notice right here, this acrylic panel that's sitting on the front of my my RC. Here is a side view of it with light here hitting the front of the RC. This is an additional diffuser panel here. This is the source. This is a close-up of that diffusion panel. Earlier we talked about how you could make sure that your EL panel is staying on the front of your telescope. See, these are just 2 1/4 nylon screws with bolts that are drilled right through the acrylic plastic, and it just basically, I'm able to hang this right on the edge of the front of the tube. And so this offers additional diffusion, and it's a little bit dimmer. Here is my light source. It's a 1 inch by 2 foot by 2 foot 36 watt LED panel light, etc., from Green Tech Energy Systems. All right, it cost about $79, and it's a bunch of LEDs in there, and it's got a transformer. To build the thing, I did it a little different than that box that Adam showed you. Imagine that this is a 1x6 piece here of pine, 1x6, and actually there's a 1x6 piece of pine all the way around. At the very back of the panel, back of the box, is the panel itself. And then above that I've got a piece of acrylic. This is it's a fairly dense acrylic. Just pretty much like Adam showed you, but it doesn't let much light through at all. In front of that, I've got another piece of acrylic, and in front of that, I've got the front of the panel that you see right there. That's the front of the panel. And that's the third diffusing. What happens is, I'm of the opinion that if there is any pattern whatsoever in your light source, and there can be with an LED because they're discrete light sources, you want to get it as far away from your diffusing as you can and let it bounce at various levels so that there's no point source of light in there anywhere. One other thing that I do have is a dimmer switch. This costs 21 bucks down at Home Depot, and it's a 110 volt dimmer switch, and it's got an on-off switch, and you can also dim it up and down. So basically, I mounted all that in a 1x6 in a box made of 1x6 and painted it up so that it would fit. Here's the bottom of the box. You can see it. So the power cord hangs out and runs over. It runs on 110 volts. Oh, this picture is just for, this has nothing to do with the light box, although you can see the light box over there. This is for Tolga. I wanted him to see what it looks like when you really learn how to manage your cables, including the radiators on your cooler. Anyway, if anybody's got any questions about how I built my panel, it's a 24 by 24 inch panel made out of LEDs, and the total cost is less than 120 bucks. Okay, that's it, Adam. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. I did.
Hey, Adam. Adam, I have a question for you.
Go ahead.
Like for people who are not do-it-yourselfers and stuff, would you be willing to make it for, like, can you make one for me?
You know what? Yeah, I actually have some extra pieces. If you wanted one, just let me know. Drop me an email, and I'll definitely be able to make you one. I was talking to Tolga, setting me up here. I was talking to Tolga about getting into the business of astronomy and how sometimes can mess some certain things up for you. Like you have to call yourself a vendor on cloudy nights, which means you're not allowed to criticize anyone else for anything. But of course, at the same time, Tolga became a vendor himself, and ask him about that because you could pick up a nice Paramount from him. But yeah, you know what? If you're not a do-it-yourselfer, and I'll tell you, these things are so easy though. I feel bad about taking people's money over these things because they're pretty darn easy to build.
You know, Adam, one thing we also should mention for those that are really cheap and are using short tube refractors and things like that, go put your iPad up on top of your telescope.
Yes, good point. Now I really have to get to this. Sammy, who posted his question before the session even started. Let me read his questions out. Asking, he's having issues with flats and he wants some clarification. What's the recommended flat well depth? Is it 1/2 or 1/3 of the histogram using a CAF 8300? Well, Sammy, I aim for 30,000 ADU with the CAF 8300, which is basically going to be a halfway point spike on the histogram. Technically, I think anywhere within the linear range you should be fine. So I'm not quite sure why you're having issues. If we don't get it resolved tonight, drop me some messages and I'll kind of work you through it. But he is commenting that okay, and number two, how long? What is your flat ADU 30,000? How long do you expose flats? So it depends because I'm using this light panel. It depends on the particular filter that I'm using, and with my RG and B filters, I want to say that my R's are like 4/10 of a second, my G's are like 5/10 of a second, my B's are like 6/10 of a second, my let me get this straight, H alphas can be I think 12 or 13 seconds. My O3s can be 5-6 seconds. I think I have that right. I don't think I have that backwards. But of course, this is with my RC at f 5.7. So when I do it with my William Optics, they're going to be faster. They're going to be much faster. In fact, that's when I get into issues with the exposure being so quick. Now, one of the things that Alex just commented on that's definitely worth having me comment on is Sequence Generator Pro has flats calibration wizard. So basically, you put your flat panel on the top of the scope, you click, well, you tell it which filters you want to calibrate, you tell them if you're binning or not, you click OK, and it runs through all of your filters, and it determines the proper exposure. Then it saves it to your particular hardware profile. So anytime you do the drop down, you click flats, you select your filter, it automatically selects the right exposure for you. So you really don't have to do it over and over and over again. Yeah, Eric's reiterating that point. If you have a shutter, you don't want too short of an exposure. That's where you run into issues with either seeing the effects of the shutter, or well, CCDs are CCDs have what they call evenly illuminated shutters, but they only operate so fast. And each CCD is specified to have a lower limit shutter speed. So you do have to pay attention to that. And I say give yourself some headroom on that. Don't if your CCD shutter specified at 0.2 of a second, double it just to be safe. But I did see question 3 from Sammy. Pix Insight flats always fail to calibrate the lights he tries. 15,000, 20,000, 25,000, 33,000, 35,000. Can't fix vignetting. Always gets darker towards the edges and dust donuts. Is there anything I miss with Pix Insight? You know, Pix Insight Bash pre-processing script seems to work fine for me, so I'm not quite sure what you could do wrong. It sounds like you know what you're doing, so it's hard for me to.
Sammy, are you putting in all of the calibration frames, including calibration frames for the flat darks? Yeah, I don't think you're out. I mean, I don't know if you're there.
He's not. I asked him a question earlier and he didn't type it. I hope he's still watching because I know he asked early on. I hope I didn't put it off too long. But it's hard for me really to identify why. I don't think it would have anything to do with the gain setting in the camera, like any of those odd issues. It just seems like if you were to be 25,000 to 35,000, should work. If the filters are identified properly, make sure that it is correctable. In other words, make sure that there's actual signal in the edges of your image. You're not using too large of a sensor for your particular setup, or make sure that there's no choke point that is actually limiting the signal around the edges. Maybe part of the reason I was putting you off till the very end is because I read your comments earlier and I couldn't put my finger on what was going wrong.
You know, I think Alex is probably onto something there in terms of, you know, it's important to make sure that your bias and darks match, and that, you know, not the incorrect one is being picked up and used. Both, you know, and they should really match in terms of temperature and exposure and everything like that, ideally. And you know, those things can really affect how the flat is applied, right? So, you know, if your dark is off, if it's being scaled incorrectly, if you're using scaling or something like that, that can really throw off the application of the flat and end up with overcorrection or undercorrection due to the dark or the bias.
You know, I never use dark scaling. I always have my darks exactly the exposure that the lights are, and that has eliminated all those issues with scaling. It takes a little more time sometimes, but it's certainly worth it, and the darks last a bit.
Adam, I had a couple other things I wanted to point out as well.
Go ahead, Dave.
I've seen issues before, both with mine and some other setups, where if your flat frame device has a very reflective surface and you're putting it very near the optical tube, you can end up with reflections that can actually throw off the flats. Internal reflections that are normally not present when you're actually gathering lights. So that's something to pay attention to. I found actually I had a big improvement when I started putting, you know, a sheet of paper in between my flat frame device and the optical tube, right? So because I was putting mine directly on top, right? It was very close and it had a very glossy surface, and just putting the piece of paper in there made a big difference. And the other one is, you may have covered this earlier, I'm not sure, but there's a point where exposures can be too short, where they won't apply correctly, even if you're not using a physical shutter, right? So if you're down in the less than 1/10 of a second exposure times, there are issues that can crop in. I actually don't know what causes it, but I've certainly encountered it before, where if I take really short exposures versus, say, a second-long exposure, the 0.05 exposures don't apply correctly, right? So just a couple other things to watch out for.
Two good points. Yeah, that's a good point about the reflective surface, or even in any possibility that there could be any sort of light leak inside of it, possibly around the edges. I guess that could cause the flat to, well, that would definitely cause the flat to apply improperly. Any light that's getting in there that's not supposed to be in there, that's not a reflection of the optical imperfections in your system, will mess up your flats. Sammy, I hope we gave you some good ideas. Feel free. I don't know if you're on cloudy nights, but feel free to ask more questions or drop me a message, because it should work. I'd hate to have it not work. Go through all this and still have it not work.
One other thing, Adam, we should remind folks that we've done several programs through the years on flat frames, and one of the messages I get over and over again is that don't get way hung up on everything. You know, it's not. We can make this a lot more difficult than we want to, and that's hard to say to like Sammy, because he's obviously having some problems with it. But you know, like, yeah, if your T-shirt has a weave to it, no, your camera's not going to pick up the weave on it. You know, if your light source, if your flat light source has a piece of dust on it, it's not going to be close enough to focus, or it's going to be too close to focus, etc. So don't get too hung up on some of these things. And really, it's fun to experiment with building some of these flat boxes and stuff like that. And it should do you some good.
Yep. I'm going to go through some of the comments here. Greg Allegretti, his low-cost method is a piece of white translucent acrylic illuminated obliquely with a clamp light with a dimmer, mounted a few feet away. And he says it works well with this 12-inch SCT. So I guess you can do it in all different methods. As long as you're getting that even illumination, it's going to work. Larry Groom is commenting that Sky and Telescope had a great article about flat fields. And let me just say, if you want to read that article, the best way to do it is to Google Sky and Telescope flat fields March 11th, and you will get there. And Eric wants me to say hi to you, Larry. And that's basically all of the comments that I'm seeing in here. Yeah, that's basically it. Sammy, I hope we were able to help you there. Like I said, drop me a message or put something in comments here. We'll work through this with you, because they should be working for you. Any other comments from inside the room? I do not have anything scheduled for next week, so if I don't get anything scheduled in the next few days, we're going to have an open session and just kind of discuss a few things that we've been doing. Alex reminded me this morning, right before this session, that it's our anniversary, or I don't know if actually today
June 4th, I think. June 4th, I think.
June 4th. We missed our anniversary, so maybe I don't know. Maybe we'll have some virtual cake next week. No, we'll do an open session. We'll chat about all sorts of things. When I post it, what I'll do is I'll request topics, questions, whatever it may be. Sammy, if you want to revisit this flat issue, tell us if you had luck with it. Basically, whatever comes up, comes up. And you guys can lead the discussion with your questions.
And remember, we always need presenters. Tolga's been wonderful getting us some presenters lately. I hooked up with somebody yesterday while I was helping him build his observatory. He says he wants to come on and do a show. But you guys are all, I mean, believe me, we're not magic. We don't know all that much more than anybody else. And anybody that's got a technique, anybody that's got an invention that they want to show us, we need you. It's, you know, it's not supposed to be just us talking to you. It's supposed to be everybody pitching in here.
Yep. Even if you've got a product you want to sell, just let us know. We don't mind. We don't mind that stuff. So a book or a product or whatever it may be. in, let me think, in a few weeks, we've got someone coming on to do kind of some advanced optical stuff. Actually, John Hayes is going to come back and give us some advanced optical stuff. Well, I saw some of Josh's great images, and I bought my RC, and I'm wondering about the central obstruction, how that impacts the whole shebang. So I asked John to come on, and he was more than willing. So that'll be a good session in a couple weeks. I'm not 100% certain whether it's 2 weeks away or 3 weeks away, but that'll be posted shortly as well. Okay, that's basically it. Thanks, guys, for coming. We will see you next week.